Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a highly strategic, tightly written piece of source material today.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating one.
It really is. So it's a journal entry published on May 31st, 2026, and it's titled Notes on Gardening, Part 911.
Part 911. Just that number alone tells you so much.
Right. Like this author, whose name is Eng, by the way, clearly has a deep well of experience.
Absolutely. You don't get to entry 911 without a lot of practice discipline.
Exactly. So our mission today is to dissect the mindset of this tropical gardener as they evaluate, acquiring a very specific plant.
The Snowball Alternanthera.
Yeah, the Snowball Alternanthera. But before we get into the weeds with the plant itself, I want to ask you, the listener, a question. Have you ever looked at a retail price tag, maybe for something you really wanted, and just thought to yourself, I can outsmart this system?
Oh, I think everyone has had that moment.
Right. You see the sticker price, and instead of just, handing over your credit card, your brain immediately starts calculating workarounds.
Yeah, it's that shift from being a passive consumer to becoming a strategist.
Yes.
You start looking at an acquisition not just as a simple financial transaction, but as this biological and economic puzzle to be solved.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Eng starts this entry by asking a foundational question, right? Should they even explore getting the Snowball Alternanthera?
And the answer is yes, but with a pretty major caveat.
A huge caveat. Because Eng originally wanted to get 2 specimens of this plant,
Yeah.
but they explicitly note in the journal that they need to avoid the markup price.
Yeah, that classic markup you find at plant centers.
Right. They're aiming instead for an affordable price. So confronted with that retail markup, Eng makes this brilliant strategic pivot.
Right, instead of paying a premium for 2 plants, they decide that just 1 specimen is entirely sufficient.
Because they know they can propagate the plant in larger quantities later on. And honestly, it makes me think of baking.
Baking, okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it's like when a friend gives you a single scoop of sourdough starch.
Oh, right.
You don't need to go out and buy 10 loaves of bread. You just need that one initial biological investment.
And if you feed it and give it time, you have an endless supply of raw material.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is that the underlying cellular mechanics that make that sourdough strategy possible in plants, it's rooted in a concept called totipotency.
Totipotency. Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So unlike the vast majority of animal cells, many plant cells actually retain the genetic potential to generate an entirely new whole organism.
Wow, an entirely new organism from just one cell.
Basically, yeah. So when Eng plans to propagate, they intend to take a cutting, which means severing a piece of the stem.
Right.
And by doing so, they're forcing the local plant cells at that cut site to reboot.
Reboot, like a computer.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
Those cells stop functioning as standard stem tissue, and they de-differentiate into this mass of unspecialized cells called a callus.
A callus. Yeah.
And then they literally reprogram themselves to become root tissue.
That is wild. So buying one plant is essentially buying a biological factory.
Exactly. You aren't purchasing a finished decorative product, you're acquiring the raw genetic blueprint.
So once you have that single Snowball Alternanthera, assuming you understand how to trigger that cellular reboot you just described, the nursery's monopoly on that plant is broken.
You become the nursery.
You become the nursery. I love that. But, this approach obviously requires a fundamental shift in how you view time versus financial capital, right?
Oh, absolutely. When you buy retail, especially a fully mature plant, you're paying the nursery for their time.
Right, you're compensating them for the months of controlled watering, the optimal lighting, the nutrient management they invested.
Exactly. And Eng is choosing to keep their money and spend their own time instead.
Which takes patience.
So much patience. They are fully aware that the process of scouting, propagating, and establishing new plants from a single cutting will take seasons, not days.
Yeah, and if you're going to invest that kind of time, waiting for, totipotent cells to grow new roots just to bypass a retail markup.
The prize at the end of the process has to be worth the effort.
Exactly, which leads to why Eng specifically targets the Alternanthera ficoidea, specifically the snowball variety.
Right. And spoiler alert, it's not for the flowers.
No, not at all. The journal notes that the main attraction of this plant is its striking variegated foliage.
The leaves, yeah. They feature this gorgeous mix of green and creamy white in speckled patterns.
And the blooms themselves are tiny, just these little white or yellowish white things. And Eng notes they're completely overshadowed by the leaves.
Yeah, Eng even mentions having to rely on photos from other sources just to see the blooms. because they didn't manage to capture a photo of one themselves.
Wow, really?
Yeah. The flowers are completely an afterthought to the foliage.
You know, I often challenge the standard gardening logic that puts the flower on a pedestal.
Oh, totally. We are so conditioned to think the massive show-stopping bloom is the ultimate goal.
Right. But Ang compares the snowball's foliage overshadowing its bloom to a coleus plant, and that comparison is highly revealing.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because gardeners who grow coleus will often actively pinch the flowers off the plant the moment they appear.
Wait, they just physically remove them?
Yeah, they literally pinch them off to interrupt the plant's hormonal signaling.
Wow.
When a plant flowers, it shifts a massive amount of its energy into reproduction and seed creation.
So by ignoring the tiny blooms in favor of the leaves, Ang is focusing on the permanent architectural elements of the garden.
Exactly, rather than wasting attention on a fleeting reproductive cycle.
Okay, but valuing the architectural foliage over the bloom is a sophisticated aesthetic choice, but it comes with a biological cost, right?
Oh, definitely.
Right.
Specifically because of the variegation Ang desires.
Right, those creamy white speckles on the leaves?
Yeah, those speckles are areas where the plant cells lack chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is the pigment responsible for capturing light energy to drive photosynthesis.
So by deliberately choosing a highly variegated plant, Ang is intentionally selecting a weaker organism.
Exactly. The green sections of the leaf have to work overtime to produce enough energy to support the creamy white sections that aren't contributing to photosynthesis at all.
So what does this all mean for the gardener?
It means Ang isn't just looking for something pretty. They are taking on a structural cultivation challenge.
Because a plant with lower chlorophyll levels requires a much more calculated environment to thrive.
Right. If it doesn't get enough light, it might start overproducing green chlorophyll to survive, causing it to lose that striking white variegation that made Ang want it in the first place.
Oh, that makes sense. But if it gets too much intense light,
Then those white, unprotected sections will scorch.
just burn right up.
Yep. And this delicate balance required by the variegated leaves directly informs the next phase of Ang's evaluation, which is the environmental assessment.
Right, the environment. Because Ang looks at the snowball and notes that it appears to be a, quote, rather hardy plant.
But then biologically, it's classified as a tender perennial.
Which feels like a contradiction.
It does. The visual strength of the speckled leaves masks a fundamental biological vulnerability.
Right, being a tender perennial means it lacks the cellular mechanisms to survive freezing temperatures.
The plant might live for years, but frost is its absolute kryptonite.
But like, what actually happens to it in the frost?
Well, at a microscopic level, when a tender perennial is exposed to freezing temperatures, the water inside its plant cells freezes and expands into sharp ice crystals.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah. These crystals act like tiny knives, physically puncturing and rupturing the cell walls.
That sounds brutal.
It is. When the plant thaws, the damaged cells collapse, and the tissue turns to a black, mushy liquid. The plant simply dissolves from the inside out.
Wow, dissolve from the inside out. But the journal notes this fatal weakness is a complete non-issue for Ang.
Right, because Ang lives in a tropical climate.
Exactly. There is no frost season. The freezing temperatures that would rupture those cell walls just do not exist in Ang's world.
Which is a huge geographical advantage. It completely changes the rulebook for what they can cultivate.
But what's crazy is that even in a safe, frost-free tropical zone, Ang does not assume the plant will just thrive universally across their property.
No, not at all. The journal explicitly states the goal is to evaluate if the plant is suitable for Ang's different microclimates and their specific gardening style.
A novice might assume a tropical climate means the entire property is just this uniform paradise.
Right. But a seasoned cultivator understands that a single yard is a mosaic of incredibly distinct environmental zones.
You know, I always conceptualize microclimates by thinking about the thermal mass of standard building materials.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, like you can have a perfectly tropical yard, but a concrete driveway or a south-facing brick wall acts as a massive thermal battery.
It absorbs solar radiation all day and radiates that heat all night.
Exactly. Creating a hyper-localized arid oven just inches away from a cooler, damp patch of soil shaded by a mature tree canopy.
Just 10 feet of distance can drastically alter the ambient temperature, the humidity, and the soil moisture retention.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Ang's assessment of microclimates is really an exercise in hyperlocal risk management.
because we established that the creamy white chlorophyll-deficient speckles of the snowball are susceptible to scorching.
Right. If Ang places this plant against that heat-radiating brick wall in direct afternoon sun, the foliage will burn.
So finding the optimal location requires matching the genetic limitations of the plant to the specific thermal and solar dynamics of the yard.
And Ang is doing all this while also factoring in their personal gardening style.
Right, because the microclimate has to support the plant, but the plant's placement also has to align with the gardener's habits.
Are they someone who enjoys meticulous daily watering? Or do they prefer a more hands-off, drought-tolerant approach?
Yeah, placing a moisture-loving plant in a microclimate that drains quickly means the gardener will be forced to change their style to keep it alive.
Ang is essentially interviewing the plant to see if it fits the culture of their garden.
Interviewing the plant, I love that, and aligning the plant's needs with both the microclimate and the cultivator's habits requires intense observation.
You cannot successfully execute this strategy by rushing.
No, you can't. And here's where it gets really interesting to me. All of this, the totipotent cellular propagation strategy, the energy balance of the variegated leaves, the hyperlocal thermal dynamics, it's all entirely theoretical up to this point.
Right. Ang still has to physically acquire the biological starter material to put this plan in motion.
Exactly. And the journal entry concludes with this thought. Let's see how this goes in the coming weeks, especially when I've resumed my field trips to different gardening centers or nurseries.
Notice Ang calls them field trips.
Yes, they do not say when I go shopping.
The linguistic choice of field trips combined with the timeline of coming weeks implies a very deliberate, methodical pace.
It frames these nursery visits as targeted scouting missions.
Ang is going to physically travel to different centers over an extended period. This is a calculated hunt.
Because you don't just buy the first plant you see if you were planning to clone it, right?
Definitely not. You have to inspect different specimens, check for hidden pests, evaluate the health of the stem structure.
Because that stem is going to be your propagation factory.
Exactly. If you start with a weak, leggy plant, your cuttings are going to struggle to form that callus and root system we discussed earlier.
This raises an important question.
It does. It raises a question about modern consumption versus traditional cultivation.
Because in an era where Ang could easily pull up an application on their phone, pay an exorbitant premium, and have 5 mature Snowball Alternantheras delivered to their door by tomorrow afternoon.
They're actively choosing friction.
They are actively choosing to wait weeks, just to physically walk the aisles of multiple nurseries.
It really showcases the discipline of true horticulture. The waiting, the observing, the physical inspection of the foliage, hunting for the right specimen at the right price.
These are not inconveniences. They are integral components of the craft.
Exactly. By rejecting the instant gratification of retail delivery, Ang is fully engaging with the process of cultivation before they even own the plant.
The observation is the hobby.
Yes.
You don't get the intellectual reward if you just click buy now and accept the retail markup. You get the reward by finding the optimal specimen, bringing it home, multiplying it, and completely bypassing the economic system that tried to charge you a premium for time you were willing to spend yourself.
It is a highly analytical approach to a seemingly simple task.
Let's take a step back and look at the framework Ang has provided in just a few short journal notes. We started with the economic reality of a retail markup and Ang immediately deploying a biological workaround.
Acquiring a single plant to propagate based on the totipotency of plant cells.
Right. Then we examined the deliberate aesthetic strategy of valuing a constant structural architecture of variegated foliage.
Over the immense energy cost of fleeting reproductive blooms.
Yeah. We also saw how living in a frost-free tropical zone eliminates the cellular rupture that normally kills tender perennials.
Turning a fatal biological weakness into a complete non-issue.
Yet, despite that geographical advantage, we saw the rigorous discipline of mapping hyperlocal microclimates.
Ang isn't relying on the macroclimate. They're meticulously analyzing thermal mass, light exposure, and their own watering habits.
To find the precise balance for a plant with lower chlorophyll levels. And finally, we saw the value of approaching acquisition as a patient, multi-week field trip, rather than a panicked impulse buy.
It is a remarkable synthesis of economics, biology, environmental science, and patience, all contained within Entry 911.
It's a powerful framework, and I think it extends far beyond the garden. I really want you, the listener, to consider how this methodology applies to your own projects.
Yeah, how often do you pay the metaphorical retail markup because you want the finished product today rather than investing your own time to build it from raw materials.
Exactly. Are you mapping the microclimates of your own resources, placing your efforts in environments where they will actually thrive based on your specific style, rather than assuming universal success?
Taking the time to locate a single high-quality input and multiplying it through careful, calculated strategy is a universally applicable lesson.
It absolutely is. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought, strictly based on the biological strategy Ang laid out in this journal entry.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the ultimate result of Ang's plan. If Ang successfully bypasses those plant center markups by purchasing one single Snowball Alternanthera,
Right.
and then takes stem cuttings, forcing those cells to reboot and grow roots, and spreads those new plants across all the different microclimates in their yard.
They're essentially creating a landscape filled with identical genetic clones.
Yes, every new plant shares the exact same DNA as that original retail purchase.
Wow.
While this is a brilliant economic strategy for the budget, it introduces a hidden risk. How might a garden filled entirely with identical genetic clones react if that historically safe, highly stable, frost-free tropical climate suddenly experiences an unexpected extreme weather shift?
Oh, wow. If every plant in the yard shares the exact same genetic strengths, they also share the exact same fatal vulnerabilities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A brilliant financial maneuver that creates a single point of failure spread across an entire ecosystem.
That is definitely something to mull over.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.